Denmark moves towards nationwide ban on Islamic call to prayer amid debate over integration and religious freedom. The Danish government is considering a nationwide ban on the Islamic call to prayer, known as the Adhan, in a move that has reignited debate over immigration, cultural the Danish government is considering a nationwide ban on the Islamic call to prayer, known as the Adhan, in a move that has reignited debate over immigration, cultural identity, and religious freedom in the Scandinavian country. Now it's time to break down every angle of this story on our AI
Think
podcast.
about your favorite movie for a second. Just hold the image of its most iconic, sweeping cinematic scene in your mind.
Okay, I got one.
Right, so imagine the camera is panning across this gorgeous landscape. Now imagine watching that exact same scene, but someone in the editing room has completely swapped out the epic orchestral score for like a heavy metal track.
Or maybe a high-tempo electronic dance song.
Exactly. The visual landscape hasn't shifted a single millimeter, right?
Yeah.
But the emotional response.
Yeah, the entire atmosphere of the scene.
It's suddenly unrecognizable. I mean, the brain registers this profound dissonance between what the eyes are seeing and what the ears are hearing.
Because sound is entirely invisible, yet it absolutely dictates our perception of reality.
It really does. That invisible layer, the ambient soundtrack of our daily lives, is the very core of what we are looking at today. So welcome to this custom deep dive crafted just for you. Today we're looking at an article titled Echoes of Identity, Denmark's Debate on the Call to Prayer.
And our mission for this deep dive is to explore the incredibly complex intersection of cultural identity, public space, and religious freedom.
We're doing that by examining Denmark's current, highly debated push to ban the Islamic call to prayer.
Yeah, because this dispute goes far beyond, local zoning ordinances or municipal city planning. The debate currently unfolding in Denmark serves as a real-time stress test for how a modern nation defines its core identity.
Right.
It forces a conversation about who gets to be seen, or in this specific case, heard in the public square. And what happens when modern demographic shifts collide with these deeply entrenched historical traditions?
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to start by looking at the immediate catalyst driving this conversation. The trigger for this renewed debate is the stark, visceral language being used by Danish leadership to push this proposal forward.
Visceral, definitely the right word for it.
Yeah, we're looking specifically at the rhetoric from Denmark's immigration minister, Morten Budskov. He's arguing that the public call to prayer, which is known as the Adhan, represents an active Islamization of public spaces.
And the specific vocabulary chosen by the minister, it really warrants close attention here. He stated unequivocally that the call to prayer has, quote, no place in Denmark.
Wow.
Yeah, he warned that the broadcast should not be heard over Danish rooftops, and he explicitly argued that parts of the country should not sound like a suburb of Islamabad.
I mean, a suburb of Islamabad is a highly evocative phrase.
Highly.
He also argued that Danish citizens should never feel uncertain about whether they're in Denmark or somewhere else when they're just walking outside through their own neighborhoods.
Right.
So going back to that movie soundtrack analogy, he's arguing that for a Danish citizen stepping out of their front door and hearing the Adhan, it feels like the soundtrack of their neighborhood has been forcefully overwritten.
He's tapping into a very primal emotional reaction regarding the auditory environment. What's fascinating here is how the proposal frames that auditory environment as a core pillar of national identity and cultural security.
How do you mean?
Well, national identity is traditionally conceptualized in visual or physical terms, right? Like flags, historical architecture, monuments.
The stuff you can see.
Exactly. But Budskov is expanding that definition to include sound. He's arguing that the ambient noise of a neighborhood carries immense cultural weight.
Huh.
By framing the sound itself as an active agent of Islamization, he elevates an auditory experience from a simple noise complaint into a matter of national security and cultural preservation.
Well, and when you append "ization" to a word like Islamization, you are portraying it as an active, ongoing process,
Yeah.
a transformation.
Yes.
The rhetoric implies a movement that is currently happening to the public space, which, naturally leads to the feeling that the state must immediately step in and turn the volume down to halt the transformation.
Right, like if the soundtrack is changing, the state feels compelled to change the track back.
But, and this is a big word, but if the minister is utilizing this dramatic rhetoric about the country sounding like a foreign suburb, you would assume these broadcasts are deafening, right?
Ubiquitous, echoing through every street corner in the country.
Exactly. But the statistical reality presented in our sources completely shatters that assumption. I mean, the contrast between the political rhetoric and the situation on the ground is staggering.
It really is. So Denmark has a total population of around 6 million people.
Okay.
Within that population, there are approximately 270,000 Muslims. Serving that entire demographic, there are roughly 100 mosques in the whole country.
And here's the crucial detail. Out of those 100 mosques, only a tiny fraction actually broadcast the call to prayer publicly.
Yeah, to understand the mechanics of the practice itself, the Adhan is the traditional Islamic call to prayer. It's designed to be broadcast 5 times daily to invite the faithful to attend prayers. In many countries around the world, this is delivered through loudspeakers mounted on minarets. It functions as a deeply important fundamental pillar of daily Islamic religious practice.
I'm just genuinely stuck on the scale of this political response, though. We have a nation of 6 million people. We have a total of 100 mosques. And our text specifically notes that only a small handful of those buildings are actually using loudspeakers outdoors.
Right.
So why pursue a sweeping nationwide ban over what is essentially a statistical anomaly? I mean, a national law seems wildly disproportionate to the actual number of broadcasts taking place.
Well, you're looking at a clash of fundamental worldviews where the sheer numbers are secondary to the underlying principles.
Okay.
Supporters of the Adhan view the broadcast as a basic, non-negotiable expression of religious freedom. The right to call a community to prayer is, for them, inextricably linked to the right to practice the religion openly.
And the critics.
Critics view these amplified public broadcasts as fundamentally altering the cultural character of local communities. To those critics, tolerating even one broadcast establishes a precedent.
Yeah.
They're fighting against the principle of the changing auditory landscape, regardless of how few mosques are currently participating.
But that principle runs headfirst into a massive legal roadblock. I need help understanding the legal mechanics here.
Sure.
Denmark is a constitutional democracy. That constitution explicitly guarantees freedom of religion. How is the government possibly arguing that banning a core religious practice is legally viable? Is a call to prayer somehow exempt from constitutional protection?
Well, the Danish constitution protects the right to public worship. The authorities do possess the power to place restrictions on certain forms of religious expression, but those mechanisms are incredibly narrow.
Like what?
Historically, restrictions only applied to anti-democratic preaching, inciting violence, or expressing material support for prohibited terrorist organizations.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so an invitation to pray, which is essentially what the Adhan is, does not naturally meet the legal threshold of anti-democratic speech.
I mean, the legal experts mentioned in our text are heavily scrutinizing this exact friction point. A blanket nationwide ban on the Adhan doesn't just bump up against the Danish constitution. It risks a severe collision with broader European human rights protections.
Exactly. The burden of proof rests entirely on the government here.
Right.
To legally justify a nationwide ban on an established religious practice, the state has to prove to the courts that the practice itself poses a fundamental threat to public order or violates a core statute.
Which seems hard to do for a prayer call.
It is. Proving that an auditory invitation to worship meets the threshold of a public threat is incredibly difficult under the current frameworks of the European Court of Human Rights.
So wait, if a nationwide ban is this legally perilous, and if only a few mosques are doing it anyway, how are cities in Denmark functioning right now without a national law?
The practical reality is that noise is managed at the municipal level. In the capital city of Copenhagen, strict noise regulations are already heavily enforced. These are not religious laws or cultural mandates, They are just standard municipal zoning and noise ordinances.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. These local regulations effectively prevent mosques from broadcasting the Adhan through outdoor loudspeakers simply by capping permissible decibel levels in residential areas.
The Grand Mosque of Copenhagen is cited in our sources as a prime example of this dynamic, right?
Yep.
They operate under agreements reached with local authorities, and as a result, they just don't issue outdoor calls to prayer. The city handles the friction without ever touching a constitutional debate on religious freedom.
And other major European nations handle the issue using the exact same mechanisms. Countries like Germany and the United Kingdom already impose restrictions on the Adhan.
Really? Just through noise laws?
Yeah, they regulate specific times a day it can be played and put a hard ceiling on how loudly it can be broadcast. They accomplish this primarily through local noise control regulations designed entirely to reduce disturbance to nearby residents.
Keeping the issue firmly in the realm of city planning rather than national identity.
Exactly.
Let me frame this structurally. If you have a problem with a loudspeaker being too loud in a residential neighborhood in Copenhagen, London, or Berlin, you use a local noise ordinance to fix it.
Right.
That local ordinance is a scalpel. It's highly precise. It solves the immediate problem of a neighborhood disturbance, and it completely avoids triggering a massive constitutional crisis about religious freedom.
And Minister Budskov's proposed nationwide ban is a sledgehammer.
Exactly. He is attempting to take a sledgehammer to a problem that local municipalities are already successfully managing with a scalpel.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the choice of the tool reveals the actual objective.
Okay, unpack that for me.
If the government's primary concern was truly centered on decibel levels and neighborhood disturbances, they would simply encourage other Danish cities to adopt Copenhagen's scalpel.
Right, just pass local noise laws.
A national law is entirely unnecessary for noise abatement. Reaching for the sledgehammer, a nationwide legal prohibition targeting a specific religious group, it proves this debate has absolutely nothing to do with noise.
Wow.
It is an exercise in setting a firm national cultural boundary. It utilizes the legal code to explicitly declare what belongs in Danish public space and what does not. The noise is merely the medium for the message.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
This current push is not a new idea born out of a sudden spike in neighborhood complaints.
Yeah.
Our sources point out that this is the third distinct attempt by Danish authorities to establish this legal framework.
Yes.
They tried to push this legislation through in 2020, and they explored it again in 2025. Both of those previous attempts failed to result in a permanent nationwide ban.
The persistence indicates a deeply entrenched political priority. I mean, the failure of the previous attempts didn't deter the administration, it simply delayed them.
But knowing they have failed twice, and knowing the monumental constitutional hurdles in their way, it seems highly probable that the debate itself is the point.
That's a great point.
Even if the administration suspects the law might fail constitutional scrutiny a third time, the act of proposing it holds immense value. Having government ministers go on the record publicly stating that parts of Denmark shouldn't sound like Islamabad, it generates rhetoric that is incredibly valuable for the administration's domestic political standing.
And that observation cuts directly to the core of Danish politics over the last 10 years. This proposal cannot be viewed in a vacuum.
No.
It's a single component of a much broader, highly calculated political landscape. The text situates this renewed push directly within the context of Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen's administration.
Right.
And her administration has garnered international attention for engineering some of the most stringent immigration and integration policies in all of Western Europe.
To truly grasp the momentum behind the Atan debate, we have to look back at the historical timeline, specifically focusing on the 2015 European migrant crisis.
Right. The 2015 crisis was a watershed moment for European immigration policy. Hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers were fleeing conflict zones, primarily in Syria, moving across the continent.
And while neighboring countries like Sweden and Germany temporarily adopted relatively open-door policies, taking in massive numbers of refugees, Denmark took a sharply divergent path.
Very sharply.
Danish authorities accepted significantly fewer asylum seekers and actively worked to make the country a less attractive destination. They even went so far as to take out advertisements in Lebanese newspapers, warning potential migrants about Denmark's strict new regulations and reduced social benefits.
Following that crisis, the Danish government began rolling out a series of highly controversial domestic policies. One of the most infamous was the jewelry law.
I remember hearing about that.
Yeah, it allowed authorities to seize valuables and cash from arriving asylum seekers to supposedly help fund their accommodation and processing costs. The strategy evolved from deterring new arrivals to heavily managing the minority populations already living within the country. This led directly to the implementation of Denmark's so-called ghetto laws.
Right.
And these laws fundamentally altered how the state interacts with immigrant communities.
The term ghetto laws sounds incredibly stark. What does active intervention under these laws actually look like for a resident living in one of these designated neighborhoods? Like, how does the mechanism work?
The mechanics are highly aggressive. The government officially designated certain low-income neighborhoods as ghettos, a term they later changed to parallel societies due to backlash.
Okay.
They based this on criteria including crime rates, employment levels, and specifically the proportion of residents with non-Western background.
Just non-Western.
Yes. Once a neighborhood receives this designation, the state can apply entirely different legal frameworks to the people living there. For instance, crimes committed within these designated zones can carry double the standard legal sentences.
Wait, double? That implies a two-tiered justice system based entirely on geographic location and demographic makeup.
It really does. And the interventions go deeper into family life, too. In these designated areas, toddlers are required by law to spend over 20 hours a week in mandatory state daycare, separated from their parents.
Wait, mandatory daycare?
Yes. The explicit goal of this mandate is to ensure the children receive instruction in Danish language and, quote, Danish values.
Oh, wow.
Furthermore, the state has actively demolished blocks of public housing in these neighborhoods, forcibly evicting residents in order to artificially reduce the concentration of immigrants and alter the demographic makeup of the area.
That is just. So through the ghetto laws, the government is exerting massive control over the physical environment, the visual aesthetics of the neighborhoods, and the demographic composition of the streets. So applying that context to our current debate, the push to ban the call to prayer is simply the next logical extension of that playbook. Having controlled the visual and physical space, they're now moving to control the auditory environment. They want to dictate the soundtrack.
It is a cohesive, decade-long strategy of demanding highly assimilated integration. The message to minority communities is clear. You may reside within the borders, but your cultural and religious expressions must not alter the pre-existing fabric of our public space.
Right.
The auditory environment must remain historically Danish.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We are watching a modern, highly developed democracy undergo a severe, real-time stress test.
Yeah.
Denmark is actively grappling with the limits of tolerance, the definition of public space, and the complex friction between preserving cultural heritage and protecting minority rights. It fundamentally asks the question of who owns the ambient environment of a community.
This raises an important question far beyond the borders of Copenhagen, too.
How so?
Well, while the specifics are localized to Denmark, the underlying tension reflects massive global anxieties regarding integration, migration, and the definition of national belonging in the 21st century. Observing how a society navigates these specific legal and cultural friction points reveals its deepest values as well as its deepest insecurities.
And the legal stakes of this specific debate hold enormous potential consequences for the rest of the continent. Let's look closely at those European human rights protections we mentioned earlier.
Right.
If the Danish government ignores the scalpel of local noise ordinances, insists on using the sledgehammer, and actually passes this blanket nationwide ban, it will almost certainly face immediate legal challenges.
Oh, without a doubt. The case would inevitably escalate beyond the Danish Supreme Court, eventually landing in front of the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg.
And the mechanics of the ECHR are what make this so critical. A ruling from the European Court of Human Rights isn't just a suggestion, right? It establishes binding legal precedent for all member states.
Exactly. If the ECHR hears the case, they have to make a definitive ruling. If they strike the Danish law down, it reinforces religious protections across Europe.
Right.
However, if the court somehow upholds Denmark's ban, validating the argument that an auditory religious broadcast can be prohibited on the grounds of cultural preservation, well, that ruling instantly creates a legal roadmap for every other European nation.
Wow. So Denmark is essentially playing a high-stakes game of constitutional chicken.
They really are.
A highly localized, performative political debate over neighborhood noise in Copenhagen could accidentally result in a landmark legal ruling. A ruling that fundamentally redefines how public religious expression is handled for Muslims living in France, Germany, Spain, and across the entire European continent.
The ripple effects of that single legal challenge would be staggering. A national attempt to control a local auditory environment could permanently alter the legal landscape of European human rights.
It all comes back to the soundtrack. If a government decides it possesses the legal authority to permanently mandate the ambient score of our daily lives, we have to ask ourselves who gets to write the music.
Yeah.
And more importantly, who gets silenced when the track inevitably changes. Keep an ear to the ground on this one. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Okay, one question for you. Should Denmark have the right to ban the Islamic call to prayer in order to preserve its cultural identity? Or would such a move violate the fundamental principle of religious freedom in a democratic society? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.